Thank you for joining us for another Hagley History Hangout. My name is Gregory Hargreaves, Program Officer in the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, Delaware. Now, during these History Hangouts, we like to bring you some of the great research being done by folks using the historical collections at the Hagley Library, especially by scholars who have received funding from the Hagley Center. One such scholar joining me today is Alex Liebman, a PhD candidate at Rutgers University, and we'll be discussing his dissertation project titled Agroecological Farming, Prehistories of Agriculture's Digital Turn. Alex, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's nice
You're
to be here.
welcome. You're very welcome. Let's start by painting with broad strokes. What is it you're researching and writing about?
Sure. So I am a geographer or becoming a geographer by training. So thinking about really broadly the sort of political, social, ecological, historical production of space. And I'm interested in sort of agricultural spaces. And today we're witnessing, well, I think there's a lot of sort of popular rhetoric and also actual technological changes around digital agriculture. And that's changing agricultural landscapes in both material ways in terms of how places are actually farmed and who's farming and what is being farmed and what type of machinery, and also in sort of the ways that agriculture is discussed, theorized, conceptualized. And I have been really interested in how does that emerge historically. I think it's easy when we think about technology, and especially about digital technology. There's almost this like this association between the digital and the new, or the novel. And I've been influenced by a lot of media studies scholars, a lot of sort of critical historians of science, to complicate what it means. What does it mean when we talk about the digital? And I've started to think through, well, can we trace the digital back to even these sort of moments before computation, or before what we know of as sort of a kind of contemporary digital wireless handheld devices, mobile technology, the sort of things we commonly associate. Is there a sort of underlying aspect, philosophy, attempts to create something, quote unquote, digital, sort of historically? And right now I'm just trying to some of this project is taking place in the American agricultural landscape. I also do work looking at international development and sort of agricultural technological development, and that's focused in Colombia, in the country of Colombia. But during the sort of long COVID change of research, I was sort of trying to reshift some of my research to look at sort of U.S. archives, and sort of thinking, okay, what were people thinking of in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s around sort of some of these questions of automation, around computation, as applied to the agricultural landscape, where I hadn't seen a ton of work done. So that's how I can tell you obviously what I found at the Hagley Museum. That's sort of how I came to begin asking some of these questions, and how I came to the Hagley Museum. So
yeah, there's just some really great and fascinating questions. And before we drill down to the smaller level, I'd like to maybe hear a little bit about your methods. It seems to me like you have one foot in physical geography and another foot in cultural geography, and you're using the methods of both to tell a more complicated story. So perhaps as a geographer, could you perhaps unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say that at this point, my methods are really trying to, in some ways this comes like a classic, I'd almost say like sort of like Marxian approach, but like how do material processes connect with systems of thought, politics, maybe ideology, although sometimes that's like feels sort of dated. But so I'm interested in sort of how do you tell a sort of social, right, and political history of technology, and rather than looking at that as sort of disembodied objects, or these sort of aspects of our lives that seem somewhat remote from really sort of concrete political, social conditions, maybe the political economic processes going on at the time, but also how are technologies a reflection, both a reflection of and also influencing particular people's ideas about the world. And so how do we sort of trace that? So in terms of methods, I think one thing I mean, I in some ways, and there's a researcher who I love at New York University who studies sort of histories of race and political economy. And he has this kind of quip. He had this quip we were talking a few weeks ago where he's like, well, in some ways, methods boil down to just what are you reading and who are you talking to? And I don't know if I can really step outside of that. I think I'm really informed by, I have a background, I have a master's in agronomy, so in the physical sciences. So I'm trying to stay really attentive to physical questions and especially not just ideas, but sort of what's occurring materially in terms of soil management, in terms of crises of underproduction or overproduction, or the perception, right, of those crises um, throughout time. Now I mean, the big thing, right, of like, how can we think about agriculture in 2022? We couldn't think about shifts in agricultural trade and technology, right, outside of ecological crises like climate change, and as those sort of develop and are create new instabilities and unknowns, but also things like the war in Ukraine, right, which has like totally shifted the agricultural landscape. Um, as a sort of geographer and somebody that's interested in sort of historical and cultural geography, it's sort of tracing those conditions um, backwards and sort of looking at how those sort of similar, whatever those processes were, might be influencing technological decisions at the time. And I think one thing that I am really interested in, that I think is a is a sort of methodological approach, is being really interested in sort of in contingency and openness, right? I'm not interested in trying to tell a sort of linear cause and effect history that leads up into this sort of the present day. I'm interested in these sort of stops, starts, failed attempts at creating a particular future that in its failure might say a lot more about people's present condition, understanding of the present when they were alive. So I think methodologically, rather than this sort of reading of the past from the vantage point of the present, of really trying to, and again, this comes back to sort of materialist approaches, like how does one occupy, embody, try to see the world through how somebody might have conceptualized computerized agriculture in 1968 or 1977 or even in 1945. And that's an approach I'm taking throughout this, which I don't know if that, yeah, methodology is tough. So I'll leave it there. I'm still really trying to figure that out as I
Mhm.
sort of move into the kind of research part of my dissertation in the next couple of years.
But it sounds like you've got a real historian's heart for this matter, especially when you're talking about contingency and openness and trying to read history forward as opposed to reading it backward. That's
Yeah.
really key to the modern discipline of history.
Mhm.
Now, who are some of the actors in this story? Who are perhaps who's interested or thinking about agricultural technology in the mid 20th century? Who are some of the whose perspectives, as you're talking about seeing through someone's eyes, whose eyes are you trying to look through?
Yeah. So, and maybe I'll just dive in here and say that the reason I came to the Hagley Museum and became
Yes.
interested in so there's the Hagley Museum has the archives of an inventor named Arthur Hall, who was a pretty prolific Bell Labs engineer, and then at some point, like in the 60s, and then definitely throughout the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, had really set out alone to try to create and sort of apply a lot of his previous industry research in telecommunications to some applied agricultural processes.
Hmm.
And the Bell Labs have been very sort of influential in and influenced by broader sort of system science and cybernetics thinking of the 50s and 60s. And I think one of my interests was in trying to trace maybe that influence into Arthur Hall's attempts to basically create a fully automated farm, which he dubbed autofarm. He
Hmm.
received a patent from the US government in 1977 for basically this massive integrated collection of systems that would try to sort of fully automate farming, from the sensing of soil moisture to harvesting to washing the produce to weeding. And I was quite interested in that because I think that really reflects this change in science more broadly, from more sort of, in some ways, more reductive, more sort of isolated mechanical processes to a much broader conception of ecology and of sort of human ecological and technology systems as really integrated. So at the same time, and one thing I think is interesting is Arthur Hall. There's one way to read Arthur Hall as a total sort of crackpot and failure. Like, he does none of this actually comes into fruition. Um, and this, and I think that is also, well, I think there are many reasons for that. One of those is that he is not interested in a sort of larger agribusiness approach, which is dominating agricultural technological changes at the time. So if we also zoom out and look at changes, sort of post World War II shifts in American agriculture, this is this time of really rapid mechanization, of sort of consolidation, of and sort of both, well, nascent, I would say nascent growth, and then sort of simultaneous consolidation of agricultural production. You have a sort of decline of smaller family farms in the U.S. throughout the 20th century. And this sort of ideology, which is really supported by by production mandates, by incentive, by crop incentives to the U.S. government, by sort of by agribusiness sort of releasing new seed varieties, by the introduction of more herbicides and pesticides. Just as you have this shift to much larger mechanized farms. And that has been sort of widely critiqued for its like environmental and social issues. And it's often, I think, I think often what can emerge from that is it can feel like there's a critique sort of against, and so I think, and I don't think this is actually accurate necessarily, but it can sort of be posed as this sort of positive, growing, mechanizing, modernization that's really based in technology, and then sort of like almost like Luddite anti-technology sort of ecology folks against pushing against that. And I think that throughout a lot of agroecology, there's actually a lot of folks that are interested in using technologies just differently, sort of, and at different types of scales and different types of questions around different types of ownership. And I think Arthur Hall, well, he's not necessarily connected to a sort of maybe more like progressive or left or radical or hippie like critique of the sort of mid 20th century turn, but he's corresponding with them, but he's explicitly interested in the application of automation to small farmers and how to sort of preserve or develop, or both preserve and develop, a sort of small farmer sector in the US in the face of large scale mechanization, but precisely through intense automation, which is, it presents this like really interesting set of, I would say, both like maybe paradoxes, but also an interesting approach as maybe we try to, as maybe one tries to hatch out of a kind of like more technology equals massive mechanization, modernization, versus sort of no technology is good because it's sort of quote unquote ecological. And so I think he just presents this like interesting, really non-player. I don't think he was necessarily relevant, but I think if we read back, he was synthesizing a ton of different ideas that were at play at the time in really interesting ways.
Mhm.
Yeah, I hope that's, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Now, how would Arthur Hall's autofarm have worked. It just seems like an incredibly daunting task to automate agriculture um,
Mhm.
in such great detail. How did he propose to do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I am, my next task is to sort of read much more closely through a lot of the patents that I
Mm,
scanned and looked through. But in general, I think he's thinking through basically a series of. It's funny, like this is not. This is pre-wireless. So he's thinking of a system of sort of integrated sensors that are literally like electromagnetic sensors with cables running to a sort of very simple computer that is running through sort of some input output feedback loops that then will trigger, right, a series of functions, like if
mm,
the soil
mhm,
is too moist, um, irrigate, and there will be sort of another cable running to the water pump that triggers at like this, right, this to send water to a certain part of the field. So it's really like this, I think, model where like one could hang out when you hang out is too informal, like work from a centralized location on the farm and really be able to manage
mhm,
um, sort of the irrigation. um, there So irrigation is a big part of it because of the sort of soil moisture part. That actually becomes a
mhm,
part that I think, if I remember correctly, um, some of that technology, he's in really close correspondence with folks both in California, in Israel, and then also in Saudi Arabia, because I think it's like probably one of the part of the systems that's like able to be siphoned off
mhm,
into like a sort of a self-contained technology. But he also has designs for like fully automated tractors for harvesting, for big like washing units for pesticide application that I don't think there's a direct link between what he was doing and say farming, contemporary sort of mechanized farming using drones or using driverless tractors in the Midwest. But there's a clear link that he's trying to get there.
mm, mhm,
So yeah, there's many different components. They're linked through some centralized computation and cable based. And he's also thinking through, and this is something I need to really dive down into, but he has some chapters. There's a book that he published that's based off of his patent that came out in 1979 called The Future World of Computerized Agriculture.
mm,
And there he is thinking through early machine learning ideas. So he's trying to figure out if he can use some templates to train some of the like optical sensors that he's using to check on like sort of some basic indicators of plant health, right? So like can the optical sensors recognize whether the plant is a particular, say, differential in color that might indicate that it needs
mhm,
to be watered, or
mhm,
that it would trigger the farmer going out to check whether it had diseases or. And I think that's interesting, especially because like some of my work more recently has been looking at the digitalization of agriculture in this sugarcane valley in Colombia, and the very like well financed, sort of well capitalized sugarcane farmers are all deeply invested in sort of deep neural networks for trying to identify things like crop diseases, and
mhm,
training AI pattern recognition in that.
mhm,
So that seems like a really again, like I'm not positing like a sort of cause and effect link, but I think these
mhm.
sort of like vestigial pre-digital attempts are really interesting to sort of trace, um, into a sort of present moment where if that seems sort of so almost self-evident. And I think when Arthur Hall was thinking about these things, he was essentially came across as like a crackpot.
Mm. Well, in terms of his social objective of um, preserving the small farm, especially in the face of massive consolidation, etc. Was Arthur Hall's notion that by promoting the small farmer from laborer to manager of this integrated technological system would allow him or her to be competitive in this era of massive corporatized farming. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's precisely, and I actually think that one of the issues that I've been thinking through is that he I think he's not. There's a way in which he is approaching the very complex issue of agriculture in some ways from his mindset as an engineer, which is to say, he's certainly not critical of, say, histories of settler colonialism or racialized labor or the dispossession of indigenous folks for land, right? He's sort of locating the ideal within a sort of Jeffersonian model of a
Mhm,
smallholder agrarian farmer,
mhm,
which, granted, also in the face of intense mechanization, is a really different alternative than um, where we've sort of come today, and in many ways also reflects, I would say, much of so-called sort of progressive agroecology at the time too. That sort of, in some ways, sort of Wendell Berry notion of a sort of human farmer as a kind of ideal American subject for the sort of for rural subject, which I think rightly so has been read like very widely critiqued. But I think that's what Arthur Hall is taking up. I think that
mhm,
makes sense. I've been thinking a lot about how, while he is in correspondence with ambassadors especially from Poland, he's sending letters right to folks in Israel and Saudi Arabia. He's applying for patents. In many ways, his own worldview is quite provincial. Like, he essentially travels between rural Maryland. Some of the Bell Labs institutes, I believe, are in sort of Baltimore, and he also spent some time at Johns Hopkins, and then he moves up and he has a lot of correspondence with some vineyards that are trying to do more automation and some vegetable farms that are in sort of southern New Jersey. Right, but this is like, then he's making these. I mean, his book is called The Future World of Computerized Agriculture. He is quite interested in how these technologies can be adapted to this sort of like universal problem facing smallholder farmers.
mhm,
And I don't think that's not necessarily also particular to Arthur Hall. I think he's reflecting in some ways a larger, in some ways, issue with what the sort of, I would say, almost like the provincialism of universality in thinking about technology.
mhm,
Where, and this is something that, as a like geographer, I think about a lot of sort of how is scale produced, right? And how often when things are conceptualized globally, are they often really reflective of regional and local dynamics? And I think he has, in his archives, he has all these newspaper clippings of all these issues facing smallholder farmers in New Jersey that are being displaced because of large scale mechanization, but also suburbia. And he's trying to think about how he can make them more profitable. He's inviting rural vineyards, the owners of them, to come over to his house to see his patent projects and sort of some prototypes. At the same time that he's writing these sort of like grandiose ideas about sort of what the face of global agriculture should take. And I just think that's a really interesting um, paradox or set of, and I'm saying sort of contradictions as just sort of maybe the contradictions that anybody trying to invent anything at any point in time is inevitably caught up in terms of being part of a social system inhabited by their own worldview, by their own upbringing, by their own perception of time and history. But there's this like, he is a really interesting sort of reflection of some of those contradictions. And maybe my like more snide critique of like the scientific or engineering mindset would be like, well, damn it, like, you didn't think about history of like, or of course you need to like think about histories of of settler colonialism or about sort of racial capitalism if you're really going to address the fundamental issues of agriculture in the U.S. At the same time, like I'm like I don't want to read that on to a intelligent Bell Labs engineer from who's sort of setting out with this worldview. It's just sort of an interesting set of conditions to think through. Yeah.
Yeah, it shows no matter how elevated an individual's perspective is, it can't be total.
Right.
I wonder if briefly, Alex, you could explain what some of the implications your work might have for the present day and perhaps near future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. And I was thinking about this morning, talking to a bunch of agronomists in development agriculture who are doing more digital projects around climate change. One thing that I think, and this is just, my small contribution is that I do think there is an infatuation and in some ways like a mystification of the sort of contemporary digital moment, and maybe it's also like a romanticism, a sort of digital an infatuation with a sort of a digital romantic that things are really complicated, really messed up, really sort of history is a mess, the future looks like it's a mess, but maybe these sort of massive projects of, especially around sort of big data, can sort of be a potential solve or salvation even from a vexed human condition that right around the sort of humans' relationship between themselves, nature, technology. And I don't believe that. I think that what is key is that questions around agency, process, ownership, these situated, who is producing the technology and where does it come from and who is it in relationship to and what types of worldviews do those embody, enact. Those are really like the key conditions, I think, in any type of sort of development and distribution and in experimentation with technology. And I think that in writing these and really tracing some of these historical processes, that can be really useful for thinking, for thinking about how to sort of approach technology and agricultural technology in the present. So that's like my, minor hope is that some of the work that I'm doing here can inform a lot of contemporary debates, spaces in which these same processes really and really the same paradoxes around questions of production, resource use, land distribution are being discussed and decided and also really fought over. And I think my the politics of my research, or one of the political parts of my research, is that I think there's much more possibility of equality, of equity, with more people having much more sort of ownership and agency over the technology they use in their day-to-day lives, and really around the invention of that and the management of that. And I think part of the ways we get there is that we tell different stories about how technology comes to be and show its contingency, its malleability, its paradoxes, rather than its sort of black box inevitability. So that's how I hope it can be useful.
Well, it's certainly a noble endeavor. And Alex, thank you for sharing your work with me today. It's been really interesting.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. And for the audience, if you would like more Hagley History Hangouts, more information on the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library, join us online. You can visit hagley.org. That's hagley.org. Don't be a stranger.